a nice way to introduce why he's here. Hi, Dr.
Great.
Merrill-Steskal.
Great. Well, thanks for having me. And I'm going to share my screen here. And okay. You should see a slide that says COVID-19 vaccines, the key to ending the COVID-19 pandemic. So I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about vaccines, COVID-19 vaccines, and where we're at and what's on the horizon. Some of the things I'd like to talk about are basically to address common questions: how these vaccines work, how well do they work, otherwise known as vaccine efficacy, how safe are the vaccines? I know there are questions about vaccine safety, and then also address, touch upon what can we expect on the horizon with respect to COVID-19 vaccines. So here's a little web comic from a person, XKCD. He's a kind of a science humorist. And so the comic says these two young adults just got their vaccine, and one is saying to the other, the first thing I'm going to do after I get the vaccine, definitely make a bunch of spike proteins and engulf them with dendritic cells. Then I'll probably display the antigens to my T cells. So a little science nerd humor, but that's what happens. You get your vaccine and you go about your merry way, and your body gets started on developing immunity right away, which is pretty exciting. So messenger RNA vaccines. So these are of course, the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccines, the primary vaccines we've used here at the vaccination centers. And to address concerns about, well, gosh, these vaccines are so new. How do we know that that we can trust them? And actually, they're not that new. There's been about 30 years of research, and so they've been studied for a long time. The major breakthrough that occurred that enabled these vaccines to become a reality is how to coat the messenger RNA in this lipid nanoparticle to enable entry into our body's cells. That messenger RNA is so fragile that without protection, it gets broken down before it has a chance to do anything in our body cell. So that Pfizer and Moderna both were able to figure out a way to coat this messenger RNA, which is, in a sense, a blueprint for making the spike protein. So this messenger RNA is brought into our body's cytoplasm, not into the nucleus, into the production floor of our cell, where the messenger RNA is read, and we create these spike proteins, which is what our body immune system responds to for the coronavirus, and then displays those on our body cells for our immune system to recognize them and get to work developing immunity. Both vaccines involved 2 doses and cold temperature requirements for storage, which has been the only kind of issue as far as making them a little more, requiring more thought about how to implement them. This slide, I have had fun sharing with the county commissioners and with the Kittitas County Medical Society, and I'm sharing it with you. This slide says statistics tip. Always try to get data that's good enough that you don't need to do statistics on it. And yeah, as you can see from the graph, there's an obvious difference between placebo group and vaccine group. And that is, in fact, what we see with both the Pfizer vaccine as well as the Moderna vaccine. You don't need to be data savvy to see that, gosh, these vaccines work. they prevent COVID. That's what we need them to do. It's pretty obvious. They are 90 to 95% effective at preventing COVID-19 in the clinical trials. And what's really fantastic is that, these vaccines, over 200 million doses of these messenger RNA vaccines have been given. And so we had, and it's been about 6 months. So we have some real world data from various countries, not just the United States, but Israel, from the Middle East, from Europe, and real world effectiveness is holding steady, 90 to 95%. And they are effective against these variants that are circulating. There's a lot of concern about, I think, from the public about, well, how effective are the vaccines against these various variants? And the vaccines continue to do a good job preventing COVID against those variants.
So Dr. Merrill-Steskal, this is Julie Peterson. When you talk about 90 to 95% effective, we are hearing about breakthrough cases. Those, I have a friend who got vaccinated and still got coronavirus. What I'm hearing you say is we knew that was going to happen, and it's happening at or below the rate we expected it to happen, right?
Exactly, and I'll address vaccine breakthrough, that whole concept. But the gist is that no vaccine is 100% effective. So even 90 to 95% effective is about as good as it gets for any vaccine. The only vaccine I can think of that's better is the measles vaccine, which is 97 to 98%. But that means that if you're 95% effective, 5 people out of 100 will get COVID despite getting vaccinated. So we expect to see some COVID cases in the vaccinated groups, and indeed that's what we're seeing, but at a rate that we anticipated with the clinical trials. So that's really good news. So vaccine breakthrough, it sounds bad, but it's just reality. Really, that's what happens with any vaccine.
Well, plus it's making headlines. That's what folks talk about when they're concerned about the vaccine. So
yeah,
okay.
But I think as far as talking to family and friends and the public, just sharing the notion that all vaccines, every vaccine is not 100% effective, but the chances are very good that it will protect one from getting COVID. So just to touch on how safe are messenger RNA vaccines, as many of you know, they're vaccines that individuals frequently know they've received. They feel achy, headachy a few days afterwards. But as far as serious side effects, really good information. About the primary serious side effect is anaphylaxis, which is not that much above the baseline rate for any injectable substance. About 2 to 5 cases per every million vaccines administered. And for anything we inject into the body, there's about a 1 case per million chance of having anaphylaxis. So a little bit higher than that, but not bad. And this is a very treatable condition. Patients are observed afterwards during the time where this could happen. No signals for serious adverse side effects. Most with any vaccine that's come into production and approved for use, the CDC typically sees serious side effects show up within 6 weeks of the vaccine approval. And it's been 6 months for the messenger RNA vaccines, and they're going strong, and we don't see any serious safety signals. So I'd like to talk next about the viral vector COVID-19 vaccines and how they work.
Dr. MS?
Yeah.
Real quick before you move on, can you think of any other vaccines that have come out that we gave 235 million doses in 6? It just seems like we're flooding the market with this vaccine, and so the time frame for serious reactions would be shorter.
Yeah, yeah, and even if it wasn't I'll talk about with the viral vector vaccines, the CDC identified a serious potential side effect within that first 6 weeks, and that's how it's meant to work, is to identify those serious side effects early on. And yes, messenger RNA vaccines, we have very reassuring data, and I don't think anything serious is going to show up at this point after having given so many vaccines and having this amount of time under our belt. So,
Dr. Merrill-Steskal, this is Dr. Lindsay. Another thing I point out of these messenger RNA vaccines is this is not brand new technology. These companies have been doing trials with other viruses and other illnesses for about 8 to 10 years with thousands of patients with the similar very low side effect profile. So this is not brand new technology. I want everyone to understand.
yeah, and like I said, there's been about 30 years actually of research for the messenger RNA vaccines. I wonder if we could save questions and comments for the end, just to make sure I get through all I want to share. That might be helpful. So
I'm sorry, I started.
See the example you started.
I know.
The viral vector vaccine. So what are we talking about? We're talking about the Janssen or J&J vaccine in the United States and the AstraZeneca vaccine in Europe. These also have decades of research and have been used in the Ebola virus vaccine and are currently being researched for a Zika virus vaccine. And the way they work is very different from the messenger RNA vaccines, but same end result. So they employ a adenovirus, a common cold virus that cannot reproduce itself. And that virus contains the gene or DNA for the spike protein. The virus enters our cells, our body then reads that DNA, makes the messenger RNA, and puts it out into our cell's cytoplasm. And from then on, it's just like the messenger RNA vaccines. The messenger RNA is read. We make this spike protein, which is displayed on our body cells to develop the immune response. The real nice thing about these viral vector vaccines, one dose, and the storage is much simpler at refrigerator temperature, which enables this vaccine to be used in a wider variety of settings. Effectiveness, overall effectiveness at preventing COVID, 66%, which is good. And it's important, and one would say, well, that's not as good as the messenger RNA vaccines. However, it's 93% effective at preventing COVID-19 associated hospitalization and 100% effective at this point at preventing death from COVID-19, which is huge. And also similar to the messenger RNA vaccines, the effectiveness appears to be similar across the variants. Safety. So this is a great example of where this safety signal was identified, and it was identified in the first 6 weeks of use. And this is a serious condition. It's called thrombosis with thrombocytopenia syndrome. It also has been observed with the AstraZeneca vaccine, which the other viral vaccine, and the issues, these individuals develop serious blood clots in their venous system, typically in locations that are concerning, the brain and in the large veins of the abdomen. For reasons that are not entirely clear, the highest risk for this happening is in women who are less than 50, and that risk seems to be at this point 7 cases per million. With the AstraZeneca vaccine in Europe, which has a little bit more time under its belt, it's about 10 cases per million. So we may see that go up in the United States, that 7 cases per million. And this identification of this TTS syndrome prompted a 1-week pause by the CDC to evaluate the risks and benefits of continuing the Janssen vaccine. And they decided to continue it, and I'll share those reasons in a moment. I'd like to take this opportunity to highlight the vaccine safety monitoring system in the United States, which is really the most robust vaccine monitoring system in the world. We have various levels of active and passive surveillance. So passive means that it requires a patient to submit a report, say, hey, I developed this side effect with this vaccine, and that goes into a database at the CDC. That's called the VAERS, Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System. We also have active surveillance. So the newest one is this vSafe, which many of you may be familiar with. You sign up for it when you get your shot, and the CDC checks in with you via smartphone as to whether you're having any adverse reaction to the vaccine. Then there's the FDA has a surveillance system. There's something called the Vaccine Safety Data Link, where there are various centers around the country where they actively monitor people who get the vaccines. So we have a very good monitoring system for our vaccination in the United States. And here's a timeline of the Janssen vaccine. Vaccination began March 2nd. And then April 13th, that's the pause was recommended. So that's 6 weeks. 6 weeks they identified, as it turns out, about, I think, 13 cases of this blood clotting problem, and said, hey, this seems to be real. This is serious. Let's pause. Let's reevaluate. Let's see if we need to stop using this vaccine or if we should continue it. To put things in perspective, so this is a sort of a representation of how common or rare this syndrome is, and this is 7 cases per million people just in the women less than 50. Again, only 1 man in the United States has been diagnosed with the TTS. More men in Europe, so we probably will see more men in the United States, is my suspicion. But so far, the highest risk is women, and that risk is 7 cases per million. That's in that very rare side effect part of this graph. And this is the same graph looking at oral contraceptives that women take and risks associated with that particular medication. I'm not trying to say that this TTS is not serious and we shouldn't worry about it, but in reality, we see many more serious side effects occurring from commonly prescribed oral contraceptives. So in perspective, it's rare, it's serious, but it is truly rare. This is a kind of a little bit of a confusing graph, but I like it because it illustrates the CDC's thinking about continuing the Janssen vaccine, the benefits and the risks. The key benefits of continuing the vaccine, and this is knowing that we also have the messenger RNA vaccines, is that by continuing the vaccine, we're going to prevent 116 COVID-related deaths in women less than 50 and 2,638 hospitalizations in that age group as well, at the cost of 7 cases of TTS. So the benefits of continuing the vaccine were thought to outweigh the risks, and it certainly makes sense when you look at these numbers. So at this point, I'd like to switch over to some COVID-19 vaccine developments. And of course, we have to have a little break to chuckle. So here's a person tapping on the computer. What are you up to? You know how when I have a package coming, I sit here refreshing the package tracker? And then she says, is that the state vaccine website? Refresh, refresh, refresh. You know it will be a while before you can refresh. They haven't even announced when refresh. Are you going to sit there clicking refresh for several months? I am ready for this pandemic to be done. And that's pretty much sums up how I felt since the beginning of the pandemic, looking at the vaccine developments, and now we're in the midst of having vaccines and even more stuff on the horizon even. So I'd like to touch upon COVID-19 vaccines for children. We're very exciting. Pfizer will likely be approved for ages 12 to 16, probably within the next week or two. Clinical trials look very promising, 100% efficacy. That's pretty darn good. Similar to adult trials, no safety signals have been seen. And then this fall, we may well see the Pfizer vaccine recommended for ages 2 and up. And Moderna and Janssen trials are also ongoing for children. So vaccinating children is key to ending this pandemic. And if we look at lessons from other diseases and existing vaccines, we know that children are very important in transmitting disease. We know also that children tend to mount, as a general rule, a better immune response to vaccines than adults. In that we've seen with a couple of vaccines, especially the pneumonia vaccine and the influenza vaccine, that declines in childhood disease as a result of vaccination often translate into declines in adult deaths, regardless if the adults have been vaccinated. It's because children aren't getting the disease, they don't give it to the adults, and the adults don't die from the disease. So vaccinating children is important, and it's exciting that we will likely be able to do that in the increasingly near future. COVID-19 vaccines on the horizon. I want to just share a little bit about the Novavax protein subunit vaccine. For individuals that are stuck on the notion that messenger RNA vaccines and the viral vector vaccines are a new type of vaccines for them. Well, the Novavax vaccine is technology that's been in use for some time. So this vaccine just contains the spike protein as well as an adjuvant, something to stimulate the immune system. And that's very similar to what we already have with Shingrix, that's highly effective for shingles, flu block, which is a vaccine for influenza. It's also what's in the how the HPV vaccine is formulated. So we know these other vaccines are very effective, and so far the clinical trials are very promising with 90% efficacy. And the anticipation is that this vaccine will be available sometime later in 2021, this year. Additional topics, boosters. There's a lot of talk in the news about boosters, and that the pharmaceutical companies are talking about boosters. Bottom line is we don't really know. We don't know how long the immune response to these vaccines will last, or if it will be ongoing. Again, so far so good. There's no sign that the vaccine efficacy is fading, but we may need boosters to help address changing variants of the virus. So, but the gist of it is that we just don't know right now. But I think don't be surprised if the boosters are recommended down the road. Who knows? It could be something like the yearly influenza vaccine to get your yearly COVID booster. We'll see. And then what about vaccine breakthrough? Like Julie brought up, vaccine breakthrough is nothing more than the notion that no vaccine is 100% effective, and it's to be anticipated that some people will get the COVID despite having the vaccine. Additional information. So if anyone would like to know how not to do their research and how to find the wrong information, this, you know, I see patients in the clinic, well, I want to do my research. Okay, well, so don't go to social media. Don't seek medical advice from friends, acquaintances, and I have people in parentheses because it's not uncommon for me to if a patient's hesitant about a vaccine, I ask, well, where are you getting your information? It's helpful for me to know. And it's not uncommon for them to say, oh, people. So people is a little bit of a, don't get your vaccine advice from people. Many internet sites, be cautious of any internet site that ends in .com. So where to get good information? You know, the Department of Health, the CDC, they have a vested interest in improving the health of populations, of our nation's population, of our state's population. They are a trusted source of information, and there's no reason they would want to mislead anyone about health issues. Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, I have found, is a wonderful resource. They have a vaccine education center, very good, very thorough, very helpful information. And in general, while you're avoiding the .com websites, you can tend to trust .government or .edu. And then lastly, talk to your primary care provider, because they are most likely to know you as a person and have your health interests at close to their heart. So talk to your primary care provider if there are any questions or concerns about COVID vaccination. In summary, these vaccines work. We are so fortunate. They prevent COVID-19 infection, they prevent death, the vaccines are safe. We have an expanding number of vaccine options, the messenger RNA, the viral vector, and then upcoming we'll have a protein subunit vaccine, and we'll have increasing ages where that can be vaccinated, which is, I think, very important to ending this pandemic. And lastly, I can't stress enough to use trusted sources for your vaccine information. Lastly, the more of us who get vaccinated, the more of us who can, the more ability we will have to turn this bar graph around, which shows the estimated number of distinct people hugged per year. And we were looking really good up until 2020 or 2020 when it significantly dropped off. So we need to get those bars moving back up in the other direction. And I think vaccination is the primary way we will be able to do that. Thank you. All right, now I'd love to entertain any questions.
Well, let me just say before we take questions, I just want to reflect on how fortunate we are to have an expert of Dr. Merrill-Steskal's caliber in the room, and I don't want to forget to highlight the fact that Dr. Merrill-Steskal is a past fellow, a vaccine fellow of the American Association of Family Practice. And he lends his expertise statewide and even nationally. And for us to be able to call on him over lunch is